All right. Welcome to No Way But North, where we talk about the miracles of recovery and the tools used to achieve them. My name is Cooper Lyons. My clean date is November 27th, 2010, and I'm your host. Not, as always, however, Big John Meldrum is not here. He may be joining us about halfway through the episode. He's running a little late, had some things to take care of. Today, though, we are joined by, hopefully I don't butcher the last name. I have the pronunciation written out on my introduction, but Todd Soulseeder.
Soulseeder. Very, very close.
So
really good.
Close. So close. Better than most.
That's
right. Yeah. So I got a pretty impressive resume I got to read off here. So bear with me while I'm reading through this intro. Todd has been working in the mental health field for approximately 10 years as a mental health technician, intensive behavioral interventionist, psychosocial rehabilitation specialist, and outpatient psychiatry. He graduated from Montana State University in 2004 with a master's in education, curriculum focus, and from Idaho State University in 2015 with a master's in physician assistant studies. He carries a current certification as a PAC. His primary interests are improving mental health outcomes for his patients and the community as a whole through patient-centered care, education, and program development, as well as hunting. Avid hunter.
Thank you.
Todd also is engaged in activities outside of work, including 2018-2019 Idaho Academy of Physician Assistants President, the IAPA to American Academy of Physician Assistants, House of Delegates Representative, preceptor for PA students for Idaho State University, and affiliate faculty status at ISU. Holy cow, man. Well, and as we were talking before the episode started, you've done a whole bunch of other stuff before that. You were working for the Fish and Game, tracking and not hunting, but tracking and helping bears and other wildlife in Montana.
Yeah, wildlife rehabilitation. I've managed a couple of major pest control companies. I've owned my own construction company.
Man of many trades.
I have, master of none.
Yeah. I don't know about that. I think you're pretty close to it. At least in the field you're in now. I don't know about before all that, but you were saying you got bit by a couple of bears, so
I did.
So maybe not that one. Well, hey, we really appreciate you joining us on a Sunday afternoon. I'm sure you had some stuff that you'd rather be doing right now, but it means a lot to us that you come down and talk to us.
I love talking about this stuff, and it's a privilege to be invited to come talk with you guys.
We talk about it a lot. We share that office wall, so we end up talking a lot about a lot of different stuff.
Certainly.
So, cool. Well, guys, we're basically going to be talking about the culture of medication around mental health, which is a very broad topic, as I'm sure most of you know, but we'll be trying to cover a very, very broad topic in a relatively short amount of time.
Sure.
So we might be skipping over some things, but bear with us. I'm sure we'll have some good content with a guest like you and your resume like yours. So guys, today's quote though, which Todd came up with on his own, so I'm going to have you talk about it first. There comes a time when we need to just stop pulling people out of the river. We need to go upstream and see why they're falling in. Desmond Tutu. And I hope I'm saying that last name right.
Correct.
So where did you find that? I really, really, really like that quote. I read that. I was like, that's perfect.
Yeah.
So
it's one that I've heard off and on throughout the years. The last few years, especially being in outpatient psychiatry. I think a lot of times what we end up focusing on is the pound of cure versus the penny of prevention. It's one of the interesting things I look at, even with what we're doing at North Point, is that, of course, we're focused very heavily on curing the disease of addiction for our patients.
Of course.
But as I look at that philosophically, I think in our long-term impact, because these diseases are so cyclical and, virtually inherited through behavior, that what we're doing is we're impacting the future of addiction by helping people with addictions today so that their children and their grandchildren don't suffer with the same problems that they have.
Yeah, well, and so for me, it was like, let's not focus on the current symptoms to try to cure or get you into recovery, right?
Sure.
We can load you up with meds and we can, lock you in a room or in a building for 28 days and get you clean.
Right.
But that's not going to work.
No.
You're going to continue to relapse. You're going to continue to express the same behaviors that are getting you into the legal system or, ruining relationships, things like that. So what we do is we go back and we look at where did these resentments come from? Why is my brain chemistry off? Why are these things happening and the reasons behind them?
Yeah.
Right.
And I think it's addiction just as an addiction because people like being intoxicated is not really all that common. Most typically addiction stems from self-medicating some form of problem in our lives, whether that be family relationships, death of a loved one, job stress, whatever it might be. And one of the big struggles is that people utilize these substances because they work.
Yeah.
They're not very functional, but they do shut down that part of our brain that's stressed out, scared, sad, whatever it might be.
Focus on something completely different.
Right. And it's just a very dysfunctional long-term process to treat those things. And so, if we don't address the core issue of the addiction, I can dry you out, but you're not going to stay dried out.
Well, I would say even prescription medications, I have to be careful because, and I want to say before we actually get started on this that I am not by any means against medication. Don't think they're bad things. I think there are plenty of situations where medications are going to be required for
Certainly.
a long term, possibly the rest of your life.
Absolutely.
But I do think they're overprescribed, things like that. And we have a culture that needs to change, at least in America. But even those prescription medications, it's not functional over a long period of time for a lot of people.
Yeah, and again, I think a lot of times with prescription medications, especially for mental health disorders, the real function of those medications for most disorders is to try and kind of be a crutch to get over that initial hill of how do I calm myself down enough so that I can actually get into therapy and start talking about these problems and trying to find the root cause of them and solve them.
Losing my mind.
And they're an enhancement in many ways to the therapeutic process. There are certainly disorders that do, like you said, require long-term, if not lifelong, near lifelong medication. But a lot of our disorders, depression, anxiety, are two prime examples. Very frequently, those don't require lifelong treatment with medications as long as we get the therapeutic process on board.
And you're practicing the things you learn in that therapeutic process.
Right. Our coping skills, our forgiveness, healthy lifestyle. It's like one of the things we hear a lot about in common culture is that, if you're depressed, well, we hear that exercise and diet and all these wonderful things, good sleep, they all help fight the depression process. Well, that's true. However, all of those things are also part and parcel diagnostic-wise of what the depression actually is. So telling somebody who eats to cover their emotions and can't sleep at night and just feels like they want to isolate and has no motivation, that the solution is to have the opposite of those. Well, yeah, I agree, that's true, but it's not really functional to get them there.
Well, it's not feasible.
Right, in many cases, yeah.
Because I know for me, one of the main things, so I've been diagnosed with depression, is I have to have a morning routine. Right. Like I have to get out of bed and go to the gym and come back, have a decent breakfast, do some meditation, and start my day that way. But when I'm in a depressive state, it is near impossible for me to get out of bed on time to go to work, which I go to work at 10 a.m. Right. It's not like 6 a.m.
I've noticed.
Yeah. So it's difficult to get up and go to the gym and meditate and eat a healthy breakfast when it just takes everything I have to get out of bed and make it to work.
Absolutely.
Right. And so those medications, that's kind of what they're supposed to do, is make it possible to get into that routine and build those habits and do those things.
Definitely. I would say they're not, this is something I deal with a lot with patients, is they interpret the medications as that, if I take this medication, it's going to make me happy or have energy, which isn't really necessarily the case. What's really the case is we reduce the depressive symptoms enough that you can have the opportunity to be happy and active and do those things, engaging in treatment, engaging in your life outside of the struggles of your depression or anxiety or psychosis or any of these disorders.
Yeah. So that's the goal, right? Is that people are taking these medications in appropriate doses and they're using that to get stable and then build healthy habits, lifestyles, coping mechanisms that they'll hopefully carry with them for the rest of their life, right? That's the goal. What's the culture from your perspective in the medication industry, right? 'Cause that's a lot of what your job is prescribing the right doses of medications, the right kind of medications for the right situations.
Correct.
So what's the culture currently?
I want to be careful about how I kind of talk about this, because I think it's very rare that I find any provider in medicine in all across fields in general, but especially what I see mostly is psychiatry practice, who is sitting at the end of the day thinking, man, I just should have given more pills out to people because I just didn't hit my quota or something.
Yeah.
A common misconception is that we get some kind of kickback by prescribing medications. We get nothing.
Yeah.
In fact, oftentimes it costs us time and effort to be able to get these medications to people. But kind of the common culture in the U.S. is that we would like to have an instant solution for a long-term problem. And it's hard to blame people. It's very much easier to walk into my office and see me for a few minutes and say, okay, well, if we prescribe a little Celexa or a little this, little that, you're going to be feeling better in a couple of weeks here. As opposed to, well, we're going to go through this therapy process that's going to take months, maybe years, and we're going to force you to slog through a lot of these hard things you don't want to face already. Particularly in American culture, that's something that we just aren't really up for initially.
Yeah. Well, and then also build these habits that are going to take work that you're going to have to do every day for the rest of your life, probably.
Or you can just take this pill. Now, one of the big downfalls of that is it's incredibly rare that we get long-term resolution with any given medication for a problem. And by that, I mean is that if I prescribe a specific antidepressant for someone, realistically, and frequently what we see is an active lifespan of that being effective for somewhere between a year and a half to 5 or 6 years. And at that point, we'll have to transition to a new antidepressant, add in something adjunctively.
Interesting.
The problem becomes is that for many people, there may only be 1 or 2 antidepressants that actually work. So we are kind of burning the candle at both ends by just using the pharmaceutical route. Although, again, I think the pharmaceutical route is very important for establishing initial stability, if you will. And that's another misconception patients have is that, well, this works for me today, so I'm done. I can just walk out of here and just take this for the rest of my life.
And there'll be no ramifications.
And there'll be no ramifications, no side effects. And all of these medications do, of course, have side effects, long-term consequences.
Every substance you take into your body does,
the
right?
water we're drinking, it all does.
I'm
sorry, I
drinking
lost
coffee.
my train of
I
thought
don't know
there.
about you.
I tried to back off. It's afternoon.
Again, still working on those healthy lifestyle habits. So what are some of the kind of continued ramifications for those medications? So if you continue taking those long term, not only for the individual but for what's the word I'm looking for the industry, right? The kind of our culture,
right? Well, so one of a few generic physical things, like every medication we take is basically processed through your kidneys or your liver. They do cause some level of damage long term. One of the classics that we see over the counter in America that is not really necessarily that way in the rest of the first world, where you can go to Costco and buy 1,000 ibuprofen.
Yeah.
A lot of countries you can get packs of 3, packs of 10, and that's what you get. So there's long-term end organ issues that we have to face. Strictly speaking, from a mental health standpoint, as to what are the long-term ramifications of just using a medication, again, it's that we're going to hit a wall with these meds where they're not going to work. We're going to hit a situation where I'm out of things to prescribe for you. In mental health, so if you there's things you may or may not know, but if you look at things like diabetes, blood pressure, other situations, even pain management, we end up with new medications fairly regularly, 1 or 2 a year, sometimes more, sometimes less. In mental health, if we get a new medication in a year, it feels like something's really happened. I haven't counted them up, but the entire mental health pharmacopoeia is generically 70 medications, give or take, versus hundreds for other disorders. So we have limited amount of capacity medicine-wise right now to actually try and treat something if they fail. I will say I do think a lot of that's changing. There's been a massive shift in the focus on the mental health, which I mean, obviously think is a wonderful thing.
Of course.
That it's becoming kind of the issue of the younger generation now, is that we need to normalize that people have mental health issues. We need to normalize that that doesn't make them bad or scary people, that they can lead totally healthy, normal lives. And associated with that, we're seeing an increase in the number of people attending therapy, the number of people who are engaging with their peers about these issues. I heard recently some schools are now having trainings in junior high about how to recognize depression and anxiety in your friends.
That's awesome.
So that we can help talk to them. It's also about normalizing these things. It's one of the things I talk about frequently with patients is that we've all had those days where we're depressed or anxious or worried.
Thank you for joining
sorry.
us, sir. Oh, sorry.
So we're all on some level kind of familiar with these symptoms, and we can be empathetic with others in our lives who have these that are diagnosable disorders, as opposed, as understanding what they feel like all the time, where I've felt like that a couple days this year, maybe. So I think, I'm not sure if that answered your question or not, but
No, yeah, totally. So I think so it sounds like we're moving towards kind of the right direction for,
I believe so,
for mental health in the industry. We're
so.
not moving towards a even more focused medication industry, but we're moving towards a all of it, right? Therapy, there's less stigma. I think there'll probably always be stigma, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I think just around everything there's some sort of stigma, but
right.
We're kind of moving towards I can't think of the word. What's the word I'm looking for?
Holistic treatment.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, exactly.
I do think we are. I mean, of course, there is always going to be a drive for medications, again, especially in the United States, because that's kind of how we like to deal with our struggles and our problems we're having. Right? Is that
instant fix?
Yeah.
Like
that if I could just walk out of here, Todd, with something that would just make this go away, could you hook me up with that? And my answer is always the same thing. If I had a magic wand, don't kid yourself, I'd be sharing it with everybody, but I do not.
You don't have a magic wand, Todd?
I do, but not for medications. In the pharmaceutical industry, I think sometimes gets a bad rap. They are trying to push to develop new medications, but we have to recognize as well that they're a business entity, right? They are not a government-owned situation that's trying to just enhance the well-being of everyone in the country. They're trying to make a profit. They're a company. That's what they do. And so without the work that they're doing and the funding that goes into that, we would be in a dark age as far as medicine is concerned.
Well, and that was one of the things. So I wanted to talk about kind of the causes behind kind of the instant gratification, take a pill to fix it culture that we find ourselves in. And I think that was one of the things, was leaps in science, right?
Right.
The things that we can do with medications, whether that's mental health or physical health or whatever, is amazing, right? Even in the last 10, 20 years,
mind-blowing.
The leaps, and you know that more than anybody.
Yeah, currently
so
the estimate is what was the most recent number I heard? That there's going to be they think by 2025, 2030, every year there will be a 90% increase in the amount of scientific evidence we have for medicine.
Wow.
Which is rivaling the growth of the tech industry, right? I'm old enough that I remember that there was no such thing as a cell phone. It was a pager if you were one of the cool kids. There wasn't a tech industry. AOL.
Cooper's a little young for that one.
Yeah.
I remember a time without an iPhone.
My wife had hoped that I would point out that I'm probably one of the few people on earth who still has a Hotmail account.
That's still around?
I have one. It's my
personal.
It's my be all love all account. I've worked on the junk filter for that for like 20 some odd years, and it's just almost perfect. So I refuse to let it go.
Well, it was very hard. Thank you for sending me that intro, because I couldn't find anything about you online.
Yeah, I keep it pretty hidden.
Yeah,
I keep it pretty hidden.
Understandable.
But anyway, so the amount of information, the amount of knowledge we're gaining about these issues is just exponentially growing, which is wonderful. I love to see that.
Yeah.
However, it creates a situation where we have to almost become more and more specialized as medical providers. It's hard to know a little bit about everything because there's so much everything out there now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so it becomes more difficult to keep up on the current science in psychiatry, for example. I do 50 to 100 hours of coursework and reading and everything just to keep up with the baseline. If I get interested in a certain topic, I mean, I can go down a rabbit hole for weeks chasing those things down.
Jeez.
Which is
so does the internet actually, because so one of my favorite shows is Scrubs.
sure.
And I know
Most medically accurate
trust
show
me,
there
I
is.
have a point I'm getting to. But they touch on this thing where patients think they know better than the doctors because of the internet.
WebMD.
Yeah.
Exactly. Is that something you experience? And then we'll move on to other stuff about behind the instant gratification culture.
Yeah, I would say, here's what I think I see is that there's so much information on the internet that patients, and rightfully so, do want to research their own struggles and find out what's going on. It's very uncommon that I get a patient who comes in and confronts me with, obviously I as the patient am more knowledgeable about everything to do with this disorder than you as the provider are. What I get is a lot of bad information. I call it Googleitis, right? And I think we should throw it into the DSM-5. I mean, it's all the time. Yeah. And what I tell people is that it's okay to look on the internet for information, but you have to look at the right sources. Yep. Mm-hmm. The Mayo Clinic is a good one. Medscape is a good one. If it's
Taking
a blog,
notes. Take notes.
If it is a blog, it likely is not. And so you have to just be careful where you get your information from.
So you're telling me Wikipedia is not a good one?
If I can be totally honest, Wikipedia is not the worst.
It's not the worst.
It's not. It's also I would never write a scientific paper quoting anything from Wikipedia, but I also would say that
I guess my college papers were
a bit of a struggle.
I will say that on the Wikipedia page for Boise, I am one of the famous people from Boise, Idaho.
Oh my! We're moving on.
Why does that not surprise me, John?
Moving on. So the other causes behind. So obviously, do your research. Make sure. What were those two? One more for the people in the back?
Medscape and the Mayo Clinic. I like those two specifically because they put the information out there in a way that a non-medical personnel can understand it.
Yeah.
I can give you some resources that are the kind of nerd words that I read all day, but that's just going to give people headaches and lead to less understanding. Yeah, we need layman's terms. Yep. Baseline. And the best thing always to do for everyone always is that if you don't know or you feel like you're worried or misinformed, talk to your provider. Just ask them. Mm-hmm. Most of them are very busy but happy to try and provide some education on your disorder for you.
Yeah.
Well, and I think they probably, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think a lot of, it's a job, right? You work 40, 50, sometimes 60 hours a week.
Depends on the
week. Depending on where you work. And you get into a routine. And sometimes, to no fault of any, I'm not blaming any doctors, but
right.
you see a ton of faces and you start to just go through them. And so, a lot of patients are just, that give me that instant gratification, right? And so if somebody actually asks and wants to educate, it probably, I would imagine it kind of lights you up and you're like, oh, they actually give a shit.
Yeah, specifically for me, it does. You guys have both been around me enough to know that I love the sound of my own voice. So,
good voice.
Thank you, John. I love talking about this stuff. Yeah. I absolutely believe that the key to community health is community education. If people don't know the right material, they don't come to the right conclusions.
Yep.
And I consider myself as one of the ground sources for my patients to where to find that good information.
Yeah. All the degrees you have, I would have to agree. So what are some of the other causes you see behind the kind of the pop-a pill culture that we live in? So I have a couple listed here, and I'm not sure which ones are which. I'm just going to list them out, and then we can talk about them. So the instant gratification, you touched on that a lot. Kind of our inability to handle discomfort or pain, things like that. Talked about leaps in science. Big pharma / money, kind of the money that's behind that. Mm-hmm. The ease of popping a pill versus the difficult work. Talked about that. And then kind of a misunderstanding of mental health. Like if your brain chemistry is perfect, even if it's artificial, you're fine.
That one specifically, I probably take some issue with. I don't believe so. My basic evidence for the let me start all over. I get this is one of my soapboxes, so I'm trying not to run a 30-minute conversation about this.
Good.
But
that's what editing software is for.
Yeah, right. With the medications, right? So they fundamentally alter our brain chemistry. The problem with the neurotransmitter alteration is that those neurotransmitters are utilized by every cell in our body, right? So the cells in my gut that are moving food through are utilizing the same neurotransmitter chemicals that the ones in my brain are. So we end up with side effects when we start fiddling with these things. The second big issue is that if it was all nothing but imbalanced brain chemistry, that would be a much easier problem to solve. I would be able to perform some form of test. I mean, and these things would get cheaper over time. Might be expensive if we were to do this tomorrow, but we could do a test, see like, oh, your serotonin level's off. You're a little shy on 5-HT2. Whoa, you got a lot of dopamine. And then just alter that. But what we see is that even when we do those things that we think should alter the brain chemistry to normal, that's a heavy air quotes there, it works 30-40% of the time if we're lucky, and which tells us that it's not that simple. There's much more convoluted social issues, economic issues, societal issues that lead to these problems. One of the most common things we hear, and I'm sure this is something both of you guys have heard, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. The reason you're depressed is because you're just not sucking it up enough.
That's something you probably can relate to in your early struggles with your mental health in football.
Oh yeah,
right?
Rub some dirt on it.
Yep.
That's right.
So no, I mean, absolutely. It's just an idea that people struggle with understanding that just because I'm depressed, it's not this chemical imbalance that I have, that you're just being sad. Like, stop being sad. Don't be a puss.
Yeah.
Right?
Or there's
Don't be a
nothing
bitch.
going on at home.
Right, yeah.
Or,
There's all these other situations and issues going on in your life, and right? And sometimes, just being like, oh, I'm happy today is just enough. Sometimes you need some medication. Like, sometimes I need something to balance me out.
Right.
And still to this day, I've been doing it. I'm 32 years old, and soon to be 33. And I've been taking medication since I was 12. Like, I do work with a primary care physician, and my cycle of medications goes, I take it until I'm stabilized, and then I do a taper process. And sometimes I can go 2 or 3 years without medications. Sometimes I need to jump back on. But that's something that I've learned as I go. I just don't stay on Lexapro for 14 years, right? So it's a lot of it's self-awareness, and a lot of it's like knowing my own body and stuff like that, and kind of understanding
patience,
that.
it sounds like, right?
It does take patience.
Which I don't think that we as a culture have.
Yeah. I mean,
it
does take. I mean, no. I mean,
you are not wrong.
100%. But I mean, it does take a fair amount of patience, and it does take a lot of education.
Yep.
But I mean, that's something that. I mean, this whole ordeal with myself personally started like when I was 12 years old, and I can say probably from 12 to 19, like I listened for shit for what doctors said, and took medications here and took medication there, and oh shit, I haven't taken my antidepressants in 6 days, so I'll just take 3, and so like I've done that, and I'm sure a lot of people
it's
do
common,
that, right? So, but like now it's something that I pay very close attention to, because I know how fast that I can spiral out of control if I'm not regimented with medications, and with my family medicine doctor, or my primary care physician, or my therapist and stuff like that. So
So what other things are you thinking cause and kind of push that pop a pill culture?
Honestly, the phones we keep on the tables all the time, right? Everything.
That's good job, Cooper.
That's the time.
He said he's timing. We'll see if it's true. One of the other things, like TV, right? There's been some studies done that TV is kind of worked to develop our brains to operate in 5 to 10 minute bursts, and then have 3 minutes of whatever. We've been teaching our brains to become less and less patient. We measure our success not in our personal happiness and well-being, but in our financial status against others around us, in our job status against those around us, right? So the things that we're doing, this is a personal philosophy of mine, but that if you think historically for human beings, we lived in these very tiny cultures and very tiny villages, right? And so there's 100, maybe 200 people, 50 people around. everybody in that community mattered, because even though you may not be the world's greatest arrow maker in this community, you're the best arrow maker that we've got. That makes you somebody. You may not be the best pot maker. You may not be the best at caring for children or predicting weather. But in the community, you always had matter, and you always had value. Now in these large societies, I mean, even Boise, and which isn't huge by today's standards, but is still pretty big.
You can feel alone.
I can feel alone, isolated. I have as my wife, if she listens to this, will probably chuckle. I have a pretty strong ego. And so I can feel valued in my own life right now. But if I look at myself throughout the community, even just in psychiatry in this valley, I'm just a guy doing psychiatry. I'm not the person to go to for any of these things.
For us, you are.
Well, and thank you, and that's where I try to find my value, because I try to create those small cultures and those small communities for myself. Yep. Is because if I try and measure myself against the entire world, there's always somebody bigger, smarter, faster, stronger, prettier, whatever it is, and so we end up feeling like we're never fully adequate at being valued in our community.
Yeah. Well, and then
Well, I think that's such a hard thing, because especially like you just said, like with technology, this idea of phones is there's not a lot of like human contact anymore. Just like everything is text and pictures and Facebook.
How often do you go to a restaurant and see a family sitting there eating, and nobody is looking or talk at each other?
Drives me crazy.
Yeah,
Drives me
like we
so
have a
nuts.
no phone rule in our family stuff, and don't get me wrong, we all have to enforce it upon each other at various times. But
yeah, it's like at dinner, like that I understand, but at the same time, it's a double-edged sword, because there's that kid whose parents drive him insane, right?
Sure.
They can't stand each other, but he can go to his room, be on him or her can be on his phone and talk to anybody in the world that truly understands him, and he can relate and he can feel less isolated online. He can find a community that he can be a part of, even without that human contact.
Which is true, and I'm not going to say that there aren't benefits to that, but just like look at this idea of like when I was younger and when Todd was younger.
I've always been old, John. I've never.
No, but just this idea of like I remember, we had a Super Nintendo or like a Nintendo, but like we were outside, like in like random fields collecting plywood.
There were
playing with
12
rusty
channels
nails,
on TV,
right? And so like there's so much more benefit. Like there is benefits to technology, by all means there are, but I feel like we've gotten into a society where this idea of instant gratification based off of technology has caused this unhealthy nature. Like we have, look at the statistics for obesity, depression, mental illness, all these things. A lot of this stuff can be, improved by being outside, right? Physical
Activity.
Physical exertions, things like that.
And I think too, it's a fine line, right? Because what we've been talking about so far is like one of the most important things we can do for ourselves is to develop community, have healthy things that are around us, self-awareness, all these things. And so part of that instant gratification of, well, I don't disagree. I think there's especially in our marginalized communities, a great benefit to them having an online presence, because there may just not be enough people, quote unquote, like them in their small communities where they can reach out to them and talk. But at that same time, if we have this situation where we don't get along with our parents, we don't get along with whoever, and our solution is to remove ourselves from that entirely, instead of trying to find a way to cope with it, learn how to make it function better, we just strictly go to this outside group of people who only think like I do, right? And we end up with this whole thing where, I mean, we can see this and I'm not going to go into politics, but we can see that in the political spectrum right now.
That's exactly what was going through my head, is you're in an echo chamber that just
everyone's constantly feeding me my same stuff. And again, I also agree with you as well. But I think one of the struggles with technology is it's so new to the human experience, right? We didn't evolve with cell phones. We evolved with sticks and rain. And so now it's such a flash in the pan in human evolution, the technology right now, that we just don't know how to deal with it.
For sure.
5,000 years from now, we will have answers to a lot of these problems.
But all the technology will be obsolete.
Also have my Hotmail account.
Listen, I thought by this time we would have floating cars. I'm just saying.
Hey,
I thought we'd be living like the Jetsons. I'm just throwing that out there.
there is 100% flying police cars in Dubai. Just saying.
I heard that.
I did hear that.
So before we go down that rabbit
Sorry.
what's the solution? So we talked about self-awareness when it comes to the taking medications in your own mental health, and if you have a disorder, things. You good? Oh, I thought you were gonna sneeze. And then, so kind of being honest with yourself about like your reliance on technology, your mental health, the things you need to do. If you're being lazy or dishonest with like yourself about, oh no, I can sit on my couch for a week and watch Netflix and have it be okay. With the lights off and the blinds drawn and not go to work or bathe. Like that's fine.
That's awkward.
Yeah.
That's not a thing.
So for the people out there that are starting to look at like, they might be taking medications in an unhealthy manner. They might be doing those things. What are the steps that people need to take to make sure that they're being honest with themselves? They're having balance, self-awareness, things like that.
So it's really hard, I would say, for anybody to be honest with themselves without having other people that they can trust to have input, right? Which can be a struggle for some people. They may not have good people in their lives that they can actually get valuable feedback from. But I think most people, if they look around them into their work or friendships or teachers, whatever it may be, can find somebody that could be a little bit of a sounding board for them. And I think that's a big start, is having someone to kind of not do the echo chamber, but kind of, well, I think that everything I'm doing is the best and right, and no one's telling me different. Or you see people that think that way because everyone tells them everything they do is wrong and terrible and horrible. So why would I listen to anybody's opinion, because it's all just stupid and they're just trying to break me down. That is a big first step, is you've got to find someone to help sound that off. For me, I believe for a lot of people that can also just be a counselor or a therapist, right? One of the beauties of the therapeutic process is that while we care about our patients or clients very much, we don't have personal buy-in into their stories, right? If I advise them to do something healthy or advise them something they're doing is dangerous or they could improve upon, that doesn't change what happens to me when I go home at the end of the day. Whereas when we use our friends and family for that, sometimes they have a personal bias. It's like, well, if I tell John he should not, I don't know, be so loud or whatever, because nobody would ever say that to John.
Just let him know that I scare him every morning when he comes to work.
Morning when he comes to work.
I try to scare him.
When I have a heart attack at 45, which ain't that far away, we all know what happened.
That was the best, backhanded pass. That was fantastic.
John and I like to mess with each other. You're
Love this guy. Love this guy.
My nemesis. That totally got me off my train of thought there. Sorry, I apologize.
No, you're good. You were talking about so sounding board, therapists.
Right. Where in our families might be like, well, if I ask John to do that, that makes my life better. That may not be the best thing for John, right?
Yeah.
And that would be something like, all joking aside, I appreciate that you're that big personality.
Oh, thank you.
I mean that. It brings a lot to the facility and to the patients and to everybody's kind of just mood for the day.
It's the only time I'm going to say that, by the way.
Yeah. Well, and it's recorded now for me, so it's terrible. But i.e., again, like we don't always advise people the best things. Other steps you can take, again, talk to your provider, whoever that is. If you have a family provider that you trust, if you are seeing a specialist, if you're doing any of those things, just ask what resources are out there for people. Social workers are a great place to reach out to. That's kind of the specialty, is figuring out what are the resources we have to enact to improve people's situation and lives. I would advise that probably the first step is not to go look to somebody for meds. Right?
Yep.
Look for the other things we can change in our life. And if that doesn't seem to make any help, this is, of course, barring a safety issue or something, then let's go to medication, right? I'm an absolute believer. I don't believe that we shouldn't be taking medication. I believe we shouldn't be taking as much medication as we do as a society. And I think for every individual, the correct amount of medication is the absolute least amount that allows you to function. And that we should not take any more than that, but we also shouldn't take any less than that. It's a fine line to walk there. But yeah, I think more and more community resources are also opening up as mental health gains more awareness in the United States, that you can reach out to these places.
Yep.
They want to hear from you. You know, I guess I would say if there's like a bullet point for anyone out there who is struggling with mental illness or addiction, is that you are not putting people out by asking for help.
True.
You are helping yourself, and we care. We want to be there for you. That's why we chose this path.
Well, and you're helping all the people around you by trying to be the best version of yourself
That
for
you can
yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. The one thing I would add to that is if you are struggling, please just try to get in 3 hours of exercise a week and try to go to bed and wake up at the same time every day. Sleep hygiene is one of the biggest things in my own mental health, that if I can just do that and get a routine going, then I have like a stable foundation to build other things off
Ain't nobody
of.
happy unless they're sleeping.
Yep. Yep.
That makes so much sense right now.
With that, is there anything you want to say, or Todd, you want to take us out with?
You know, I think it's super important that that we use the resources that are available to us. You know, that we get the help instead of going to friends and things and taking medications. You know, I have friends that will be like, "Oh, I'm anxious," and then somebody will be like, "Oh, I have a Xanax. Do you want a Xanax?" Right? Perfect example of the self-medication aspect. So, I think it's really important. Mental health and mental health awareness has been a huge impact for my life because it keeps me on track. And I always feel myself, and people around me can always sense it. Like when I'm not taking care of myself and I'm out of control and I'm not sleeping enough. Screw off, Cooper. Cooper sees it probably more than anybody else. But I feel myself start to slip into a bad place. So I think that that's really important that, we keep healthy contacts. This is why we have regular checkups and we have annuals, and we do these things to address the issues before they become so big that we fall apart.
Anything you want to leave
Agreed. Probably my takeaway for everyone who's struggling with these issues is don't be afraid to ask for help. Get the help. You matter. You have value as a human being. One of the biggest things I see on a daily basis is people feel devalued by their family relationships, by their employment, whatever it is. None of that's true. We all have intrinsic value as human beings.
Absolutely.
And it's a privilege to me to be able to work with people who are struggling with all these issues and to offer them what little I can to try and help them out.
Yep. Couldn't say it better myself. I'm not even going to try to leave us with a note. Thank you, guys. This has been No Way But North, where we talk about the miracles of recovery and the tools used to achieve them. If you got any value out of this podcast, please leave a review. Please tell one other person about it so they can get value also. Thanks for joining us.
Peace.
Thanks.
If you or a loved one are struggling with addiction, call 1-877-648-3125. The views and opinions expressed in No Way But North do not reflect those of North Point Recovery or any other institution or organization.